The Rebbe Zalgazunzen began the Farbrengen this afternoon that this Shabbos is Shabbos Chazoin. And it is known, the famous interpretation of Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berditchev, which was related to us through Reb Hillel Paritcher and through the Rabbeim, that Shabbos Chazoin means that this is an opportunity for Yid to envision the third Beis HaMikdash. Chazoin means vision. And when we say Shabbos Chazoin, it means that a Yid on this Shabbos has the opportunity to envision the third Beis HaMikdash. And Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berditchev explained it with a mashal of a father who once gave a very precious garment to one of his children. However, the child did not treasure the garment properly, and the garment tore. After a while, the father gave the child again a chance, and he gave him again a garment, very outstanding and precious garment. And again what happened was the child did not cherish it properly and didn't take care of it properly, and he again lost the garment. The garment tore. The garment did not hold out for a long time by the child because he didn't know how to handle it. After the child lost the garment the second time and didn't handle it properly, then what the father did was he acquired the garment again. However, he did not give it to the child. And from time to time, he shows it to the child to arouse within him a desire that he should act properly in order that he should again be worthy of getting this outstanding garment, this special garment. The same Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berditchev continues is regarding the Beis HaMikdash. We had the Beis HaMikdash twice, and we did not know how to handle it, and therefore HaKadosh Baruch Hu took it away from us. However, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to give us again the third time. And He's showing it to us from time to time, giving us an opportunity to improve our behavior, that our behavior should be such that we should be worthy of getting this garment, worthy of getting this outstanding, precious thing which is the Beis HaMikdash. And just like it's done by a father and a child, the Rebbe continues, the same thing is happening between Rabbeinu Shloim and us and Klal Yisrael, where Klal Yisrael are considered children to the Rabbeinu Shloim. And this has been a Geya Shabbos Chazayin in general. Being that it is Shabbos, Shabbos gives bracha to the entire week. And this is a week that has a very hard week that has the day of Tisha B'Av in it. In other words, a week that has many unwanted inyanim. So we have to say that the bracha that comes from Shabbos has to be parallel to the unwanted inyanim which we have during the week. In other words, it has to be a very outstanding and heavy bracha to combat with all the problems which we have during this week. And so in Mela, this is a Shabbos of Chazayin. It's such type of a bracha. It's a very outstanding and strong bracha and koiches that this Shabbos is giving into the entire week. Being that a Yid derives all of his lessons from the Inyanim and Torah which I read and learned on these days. So regarding Pashas Devarim, the Rebbe continues, Pashas Devarim is always read on Shabbos Chazayin. Every year, the Shabbos before Tisha B'Av, we read in the Torah Pashas Devarim. However, the day of the week, the day of the month rather, which Shabbos Chazayin falls out, this is not necessarily the same every year. Today, it is 4 days in the month of Av. We could have different years. It's not bound to be 4 days in the month of Av. It could be a different day in Av. Another reunion this year, that this year is a leap year, an Iber. Rabbi explained, a regular year, a Shana Pshuta, we can have repeat year after year. In fact, we could even have 3 years in a row that should be a Shana Pshuta. However, a leap year, we don't even have 2 years in a row that should be a Shana Mu'beres. So this makes this year a special year because not next year and not last year were a Shana Mu'beres. And what's the idea of a Shana Mu'beres? A Shana Mu'beres has an added month. What do we mean by an added month? We have extra days in the year. That means that this year we are given extra strength from the Rabbeinu Shloim for his Avodah. So Mamela, when we're talking about a Shabbos Chazayin, which comes out to be in a leap year, this is a Shabbos which gives extra bracha and into the entire week, into the entire forthcoming week. Then the Rebbe continues that regarding inyanim, which are supposed to be done, special inyanim in other words, these days, during the 9 days, the days before Tisha B'Av, we find many inyanim. And it's discussed in Svarim, it's discussed in Sifrei Hasidus, it's discussed in Sifrei Musar, it's discussed in many Svarim. But if we were looking to find an outstanding inyan, an outstanding advice, what we are obligated, what is suggested, what we should do during these days, the Rebbe says we don't have to search far. But listen to today's Haftarah. In today's Haftarah, the conclusion of the Haftarah, how the Haftarah ends, it ends with the words of Tziyain b'mishpat tipada v'shaveh b'tzedakah. The Rebbe says this is the end of the Haftarah, and right afterwards we say brachas, we recite brachas, mentioning HaKadosh Baruch Hu's name. What does Tziyain b'mishpat tipada v'shaveh b'tzedakah mean? It's talking about two inyanim that are extremely essential in these days. Number one is Tziyon b'mishpat tipada. What will lead to the redemption of Tziyon, that Tziyon will be redeemed, tipada, through mishpat. What means mishpat? Mishpat means learning, halacha, paskaning, shailas, learning Torah. The learning of Torah, this will lead to tipada. Then is the latter half of the pasuk, Vishaveha. How will the captives of Tzion be released? Also through tzedakah. So actually the pasuk here is talking about two inyan. The inyan of Limud HaTorah and the Sinas HaTzedakah. Both of these inyanim are extremely important for these days. Here the Rebbe mentioned that there are many mamorim from the Rabbeim that begin with Tzion b'mishpat tipada. And a maimer is a type of, the beginning of a maimer is like an introduction to the period which we are in. He said, from all the Rabbeim, all the way back, we find such maimerim. In fact, later he also mentioned that the Lekutei Torah, the first maimer in Lekutei Torah, and Chumash Devarim, is also beginning with the pasuk of Tziyon b'mishpat tipada. Talking about this, the Rebbe also mentioned an interesting thing, mentioned it on previous occasions. I think it's brought into Hayom Yom. Rabbi mentioned that every one of the Rabbeim had mamorim, special mamorim. And these mamorim, they would repeat them like once in 2-3 years. And we find it by each one of the Rabbeim, such type of an inyan, that everyone had like special, every one of the Rabbeim had different mamorim, which they would repeat them once in every few years. And again, we find many mamorim beginning with Tziyon b'mishpat tipada. Here we mentioned that interesting from the Friedrich Rebbe, we do not find many mamorim, very few mamorim in fact, that begin with Tziyon b'mishpat tipada. But regardless, this is something which is a side inyan. Regardless, what is the avodah that has to be done in these days, in the days of Bein HaMetzarim and the days before Tisha B'Av? Mishpat and tzedakah. Mishpat means the learning of Torah and the giving of tzedakah. If we are to look at Klal Yisrael is divided into two groups. There's Yisachar and Zavul. Yisachar's inyan is to learn Torah, and Zavul, not the merchants, they are the ones that are earning money, and through their earnings, Yisachar is able to sustain himself and learn the Torah. And here the Rebbe says there's a very strange custom which has developed, that as of Yud Beis Tammuz time, a vacation starts for the Bachar, the Yeshiva Bachar, and the learning which a Yeshiva Bachar usually should learn as of Yud Beis Tammuz, he learns much less. And Rebbe says it's very strange. Yud Beis Tammuz is the day when the Friedrich Rebbe was released. And this is an inyan which we always stress. Lo yosi bilvad gola kodesh baruch hu. It's something which doesn't pertain only to him, it pertains to everybody. It's supposed to bring Geula to every Yid. Something which is supposed to bring Geula to every Yid. And the Rebbe spoke about it in Beis Tammuz time, that when the Friedrich Rebbe celebrated the first year Yud Beis Tammuz, he sent a Maima with the beginning, Asara Sheyoshvim Vayiskim B'Torah. So why does Yud Beis Tammuz have to arouse that we should learn more Torah? What is happening in actuality that we're learning less? Because this is something very strange. And Bacharim are getting involved in other types of things which is not an inyan of a Bacha. And their inyan is only to sit and learn. Furthermore, Rabbi says, when a Bacha doesn't learn, he's unfair to the Yisachah, to the Zevon who's providing his needs. There are those Yidden who are contributing for the yeshiva. Yidden who are contributing for the yeshiva are doing it. Why? Because they wanted the yeshiva Bacham should sit and learn. So when the yeshiva Bacha doesn't learn, he's doing an injustice to those Yidden who are giving money to the yeshiva. And it's really hard to, the Rebbe says in Halacha there's a concept of Breira. Breira means we can figure out exactly what has a shaykhus to everyone. He says when many people contribute to the yeshiva, and this yeshiva has many talmidim in it, it's very hard. You can't trace and say that the donation from this person is going for this talmud, and so on. Memela, when one bacha doesn't learn, he's not only harming one individual, he's doing an injustice to all those who are contributing money for the yeshiva, because everybody is giving money with the intention that they want bacharim to learn, and here the talmidei yeshiva are not learning. So therefore the Rebbe is urging him very strongly that Bachrim should utilize all their time, especially these days, we're talking now in days of before Tisha B'Av, to learn for the inyan of Limud HaTorah. It says, explain the Chassidus. There are those that are going to say that as long as he's not going to bring a raya from an inyan, from a source in Chassidus, they're not going to accept it. So he says he has a source in Chassidus for this also. And those that are going to say that the raya has to be from the Hemshech, Ayin Beis, and Samach Vav. These are two famous Hemshechim in Chassidus from the Rebbe Rashab. So the Rebbe continues that in these Hemshechim, the Rebbe Rashab explains that when one learns Torah, and he knows that ultimately he will be tested on what he learns, his learning is a different one when he learns. He learns then he learns completely different because he knows that he will have a test, he will have an exam after he finishes learning. So therefore the Rebbe says he's suggesting that the Yeshiva Bacharim, a system of testing should be initiated, should be instituted, and when a Bacha knows that what he's learning, the subject matter he's learning, he's going to be tested on, then the entire learning is going to be in a completely different way. And here the Rebbe went into another issue and said that he hears that what are Bachrim involved in? Picking on those people. In other words, they are the ones who are deciding who is listening to him and who is not listening to him. Because this is not the meaning of a Bacha. And what expression do the Bachrim use? Bachrim use an expression of a nifrad. Nifrad means one who is separated. By Chassidim, this is an expression, one who is not a mekusher, one who is not attached to the Rebbe. We use the expression nifrad. He's apart from the Rebbe. So they say they're using this expression of nifrad. Says this is not the inyan of a bacha. And besides, the Rebbe says these are expressions which we never heard of. We are used to expressions of hiskashchas, in other words, being attached to the Rebbe, and so forth. Furthermore, the Rebbe says there's a klal in Gemara and in Halacha. Kol ha-poisel b'mumay poisel, which means if one says something on somebody else, that means he himself is really lacking this thing. So when Bachram go out and pick on certain individuals and claim that these individuals are not listening to him, says, really we have to examine, are these Bachram listening to him? And the truth is, the Rebbe continues, that what is the inyan of a Bacha, the inyan of a Talmud, a Yeshiva, Talmidim and Temchet Mimim. The Rebbe stressed that the Frierdiker Rebbe said that the Talmidim and Temchet Mimim are going to be the ones that are going to lead the final battle to the coming of Mashiach. Those who are interfering with the coming of Mashiach is the Talmidim of Temchet Mimim who are at the head of the battle, of this battle which will lead to the coming of Mashiach. This is the inyan of Talmidim and Temchet Mimim, not to look and go around picking who is a nifrad and using such type of evaluations, who is listening to the Rebbe and who's not listening to the Rebbe. The Rebbe expressed himself, why does he have to be schlepped into this whole thing? The Rebbe says when he talks in Yonim and Farbrengen, and then later there are those that think, was everything written down properly, put into writing, or wasn't it put into writing? So he says, what inyan are they concerned? Regarding the inyan in which he explains a Rashi, or are we talking regarding the inyan where he explains a Rambam, or the inyan where he demands a Fotzos HaMayonos? This, he says, that's not what they're debating. They're debating that when he said something, and they are learning Pshat, did he mean this person or did he mean that person? Was this put into writing properly or wasn't it put into writing properly? And if it wasn't put into writing properly, then the one who's writing it again is not a proper chassid. And all these types of interpretations, the Rebbe says it's not a time for it now. And that's not what he wants. He doesn't want even those that are going to say that they're doing it on their own time and so on and so forth. He also doesn't want that because really he's being schlepped into all this, the Rebbe says. And he doesn't want to be schlepped into all these type of conversations. He doesn't want to be involved in such conversations. Then the Rebbe continues, all this is applicable to Talmidei Yeshiva. The majority of Klal Yisrael are not Talmidei Yeshiva. They're the fathers and the mothers and the Zaydas and the Bubbas and the younger brothers and sisters of Talmidei Yeshiva. What's regarding all of them? So as the Rebbe just said, being that there are two inyanim, B'negeya, the 9 days, Bein HaMitzvah and Bein HaMitzvah, and there's the inyan of Mishpat and there's the inyan of Tzedakah. So those whose inyan is not Yoshvei Oyel, those whose inyan is not to be Yisachas, those who are Zavulans, they are to excel during this time in the other inyan, the inyan of giving of tzedakah. That these days are opportune days to give tzedakah more than we give the entire year. But the Rebbe says this is not enough. There's a Mishnah. And the Mishnah is in Pirkei Avos, and it's a Mishnah which is known to everybody. Mishnah says, Asay lecha Rav, that every person is supposed to have a Rav, an elder, a Rav. In other words, somebody who he's looking up to, somebody who's receiving guidance from. Here the Rebbe says, he wants that everyone should find himself a Rav, should find himself somebody who he's going to look up to and receive guidance from. So as he's talking to everybody, so he's referring to those who are alte Yidden, with weiße beard, with white beards and big beards. And here we're telling such reputable people, Asay lecha Rav, go ahead and make sure that you have a Rav, you have somebody, a Rav, who you are looking up to. Rabbi says every expression in the Mishnah is extremely accurate. Mishnah uses the expression Asay lecha Rav. What is the diuk of Asay? So there's an expression, Ma'asin ala tzedakah. We can force somebody to give tzedakah. In other words, the expression of Asay lends itself to the concept of forcing. In other words, we may not want it. We don't like it, and it's not gishmak, and it's not desirable, and it's much easier to get away without it. But the Mishnah says, still, Asay lecha Rav. It's an obligation on every individual to make sure that he has somebody who he's looking up to, somebody who's getting guidance from and he's looking up to.
What's the difference in this and that?
So, B'negei Talmidei Yeshiva, the Rebbe says definitely they have to sit and learn and be involved in learning and look up to their Rosh Yeshivas and their Mashpiyim and Menal. And the Rebbe said that the Rosh Yeshiva and the Mashpiyim and the Menal, they were all appointed by the Frierdiker Rebbe, the Sidei Reinu, so they definitely have to look up to them and listen to what they say. But even B'negeya to Balabatim, or we refer to it as the Zevulons, there's also this inyan, and the Rebbe also referred to an inyan of being tested. We mentioned it a few times. In other words, that we have to learn in Yonim and Torah, and being tested on them, and then the entire learning will be with a different success. And this will lead to it. That this will give everybody his personal Geulah. And by everybody being personally redeemed, this will lead to Daloi Golas, as the Rebbe has an expression, which means in Russian, to an end, will come an end to the Golas. And we will have the Geula Klalis of all of Klal Yisrael being going out through Mashiach Tzidkenu. When the Rebbe was talking about the Indian of Nifrad, Rebbe explained that there's a Zohar. Zohar says, the pasuk Altiu Kisus Kiperet Ein Hovin, the pasuk in Tehillim. So the Zohar says that the Peret abbreviates Pshat, Remez, and Drush. Torah, we know, is divided into 4 parts. There's Pshat, Remez, Drush, and Soid. Chelek HaSoid means Chelek of Kabbalah and Chassidus. All of this is part of Soid. So the Zohar says that the one who does not accept the Chelek of Soid, the Chelek of Pnimis HaTorah, is considered a Peret. Peret is an animal. A mule. The Rebbe says those that are throwing around the expression of Nifrad actually has the same shayresh. It has the word Peret. The only thing, instead of Peret has no nun, they add on the nun. But the Samach is not there. If it would have the Samach makes it for Pardes. Pardes are Torah, all parts of Torah. That's commendable. That's how it should be. But for those who are throwing around this word of Nifrad, it's equivalent to the idea of a Peret, of a mule. Then the Rebbe concluded with the following episode. He said that a Yid once wrote a letter to the Frierdiker Rebbe. And the letter was sent special delivery mail. It says in those days the difference of special delivery and regular mail was not much, but it was still a few pennies. Though, he says, the Frierdiker Rebbe was a very broad person, but when he got this letter from this individual, he later commented to him and he told him that the contents of the letter, in other words, the question which this person asked him, wasn't such an important one, it wasn't such a rush that he had to spend extra money and send the letter special delivery. It would have been okay if he would have sent it regular mail. So here we see how the Frierdiker Rebbe took into consideration every cent which a Yid spends. But on the other hand, the Rebbe says, when we're talking about this inyan, the importance of every Yid having a Rav, everyone looking up a Seilach or Rav, this the Rebbe says he wants that it should be spread all over, and it has a shaykhus to every Yid, just like the Alter Rebbe expressed himself, that the inyan of Chassidus Chabad is not something which is limited only to Lubavitcher Chassidim. It's something which every Yid has a shaykhus to. And every Yid could have a shaykhus to. The same thing, this concept of Asay L'char Rav is something which every Yid should have a shaykhus to. Says, but on the other hand, it doesn't mean that right after Havdalah, everybody should run to the airport and get onto airplanes, and everybody's going to start flying all over because he says he wants this message to bring this message of his all over. This is not what he means. But the proper channel should be used to expedite, to get this message across to every Yid possible, that everyone should follow the Psak HaMishneh of Asay L'chor Rav. Later in the Farbrengen, the Rebbe continued learning a Rashi in this week's Sedre, as it's customary, Pashas Devarim, and also explaining an inyan in the Rambam, as well as a Mishnah and Pirkei Avos. For those that follow the custom of reciting Pirkei Avos not only between Pesach and Shavuos, but Pirkei Avos is recited throughout the entire summer until Rosh Hashanah. Last Shabbos, the Rebbe brought to our attention that Rashi's inyan is not that when he quotes something from Chazal, he should say the name of the person who said this pshat. Rashi's inyan is to say, teach us pshuta shel mikra, and as far as pshuta shel mikra is concerned, the understanding of the pshat of the pasuk, there is no need to know if this Tana said it or another Tana said it. And the fact that we're getting involved, which of the Tanoim said it, this is something very strange in Rashi, and it's not practiced too often in Rashi, but still we do find exceptions when Rashi does it, so we have to have an interpretation why Taka Rashi to do. That is after Sheni in this week's Sedra. Pasuk says, Moshe is talking to the Yidden.
What's Pasuk?
Pasuk Yud Gimel. Havu lechem anoshim chachamim unavainim v'yiduyim l'shiftechem v'asimim b'rashechem. Moshe said that he told the Yidden, give me people who are chachamim, nevainim, and yiduyim l'shiftechem, and I will put them as your elders, as your heads. Actually, if we look at the Chumash here, Moshe is reviewing what has happened throughout the entire 40 years that he has been with Klal Yisrael in the mid. If we look into Rashi teaches Chachamim Kisufim. What does Kisufim mean? There's an expression Nichsif Nichsafti Labeis Avicha. Kisufim would mean a person who he's a very desirable person. Everybody is anxious to be together with him. So this is obviously how Rashi translates Chachamim. Then Rashi touches up Nevainim. What does Nevainim mean? Mevinim dava metoich dava. One who is so intelligent that he can understand one thing from the other. Good? It's not enough. Then there goes a long interpretation of Rashi. And Rashi tells us, Zui sheshal aroyas es Rabbi Yossi. This is what Aroyas asked Rabbi Yossi. Ma ben chachamim l'naviyim. An individual by the name of Aroyas asked Rabbi Yossi, what is the difference between chachamim and navayim? The pasuk says chachamim and navayim. What is the difference? And Rabbi Yossi answered him. What did he tell him? Chacham doimel shulchani oshir. A chacham is like a rich shulchani. A shulchani would mean a person who exchanges money. Kishemeviin loy dinrin lirois roye. Ukshe'ei meviin loy yoshev v'toye. When you bring him, I will explain, sometimes people want bigger bills, sometimes people prefer smaller coins. So you go to this shulchani, to this teller. So if he's a rich person, when you come to him, you exchange it. When you don't come, when he has no clients, when he has no customers, he just sits back. That's the chacham. What is the navai? Daimel shulchani taga. He's compared to the shulchani, but the shulchani who's a seicha, who's a merchant. When he has customers that want to exchange money, fine. When he doesn't have no customers, what does he do? He goes out and he looks for customers. He doesn't just sit back. So as the Rebbe explained, the rich shulchani could afford to sit back. He doesn't need it. Because furthermore, the Rebbe explained, the rich shulchani is exchanging money, but he's not even charging for it. He's a man, he's a rich person. He has a lot of money. He has big bills, he has small bills, he has change, he has everything. So when you come to him and you ask him a favor for an exchange, he'll gladly do it for you. When you don't come to him, so he's yeshiv v'taya. However, the shulchani taga, he has to make a living. If he's not going to be exchanging currencies, exchanging money, then he wouldn't have no parnasa, he wouldn't have what to eat. This is his parnasa. So when he has customers, fine. When he doesn't have no customers, he has no alternative. He has to go around and look for customers. And this is the navain. The navain is the maven dava metaych dava. This is a very, very strange thing. First of all, the word chacham and navain was already used in the Torah. When we look back to Ma'aseh HaMishkan, HaKadosh Baruch Hu told Moshe he should take chachamim and navainim, those that should be involved in erecting the Mishkan. There, Rashi doesn't get involved in no lengthy explanation. Here, when we pass a few chamashim, comes to chachamim and nevainim, Rashi gives us a whole lengthy explanation with a ma'aseh of an individual, and he tells us who the name of the individual is also. His name was Aroyas. Rashi could have said Adam Echad, Goy Echad, Hegmai, he was a guy. Hegmai Echad. Some individual asked Rabbi Yossi, what importance is it to know that his name was Aroyas? And whom did he ask? He asked Rabbi Yossi. Truth is, when we go on further into the Psukim, we find out that Chachamim, Moshe was able to find. Anoshim, Chachamim. However, Nevainim, when they needed the Nevainim for the Ma'aseh HaMishkan, they were around. Here, when Moshe was looking for individuals whom to appoint as elders of Klal Yisrael, no Nevainim. So what are you going to say? That there's a difference in time, happened at the same time, because this is not really happening the 40th year the Rebbe is going on. Continuing, this is Moshe is repeating what has happened the first year. So just like you had the Nevoinim for the erection of the Mishkan, you could have had Nevoinim to appoint them al Tzasim and Berashecha. Where are they? Rashi tells us there are no Nevoinim. Rebbe says the expression which is used in Shmois, in Chumash Shmois, in the Sedrus of the Mishkan, is a different expression. Find people that possess Chochma and Bina. If anybody could find the Lashon HaPasuk. It does not use the expression Chachamim and Avainim, just people that possess Chachma and Bina. So what is that needed for? Like you say, you needed a craftsman and a scholar to be able to put together all the Klei HaMishkan. The Rebishter told us how to make the Mishkan. Then the Rebishter Anshe Hareisa, the Rebishter has shown certain Klei HaMishkan also how to make. So you needed intelligent people, that those who saw the Klei HaMishkan, they should know how to repeat and make these Kalim again, redo it, duplicate these Kalim. Here we're talking about a completely different level. You found the Lashon HaPasuk? Anashim that have the talents of Chachma and Svuna. Here we're talking a different madrega. Anashim Chachamim Unavainim. It's a completely different thing. One who can be designed as a Chacham and designed as another. The Rebbe is continuing to explain this. Why Take Rabbi Yossi? Why Take Rabbi Yossi? The Rebbe says, regarding Rabbi Yossi, we find that he excelled in Bina. In other words, he's giving here a pirush, what is Chachma and what is Bina. Regarding Rabbi Yossi, there's a Gemara that Rabbi Yossi, whenever he said something, the Gemara uses the expression Nimukoi Imoi. Nimuk means a tam, a reason. He had always reason for whatever he said. And this we find only Benegei Rabbi Yossi. So, Rashi Taka doesn't spell it out, but Rashi gives it to us if the child wants to go a little bit deeper here and understand why Taka is this a quotation of Rabbi Yossi. So we can find a reason for it, being that Rabbi Yossi is the individual who excelled in Bina. Because Rabbi Yossi, whatever he said, was Nimukayimai. That is why Rabbi Yossi knew to explain what is a Chacham and what is a Navi. Now, the Rebbe says, it's advisable to look into Chumashim, for those of you that have Chumashim. Rebbe says he looked back and he traced to an old manuscript to a different Nusach of Rashi. And there, it is worded different. Pasuk quotes Anoshim. Havalachem Anoshim. So Rashi says, what do we mean by Anoshim? Anoshim Tzadikim. And that Ksav Yad of Rashi, the word Ksufim, as we touched up, meaning desirable individuals, wanted individuals, that also is part of the Pirush of Anoshim. Doesn't say after the word Chachamim Kisufim, but Kisufim is still attached to Anoshim. Then goes, again a quotation from the Pasuk, Chachamim Nevoinim. It goes together. Because actually in this Rashi is explaining both things. Rashi is explaining what a Chacham is and what a Novin is. So that is why it's appropriate that the Dibur HaMaschil from this Rashi should be Chachamim and Nevoinim. So now our question falls away. What does Kisufim have a shaykhs to Chachamim? It's like another taich of Chachamim. Kisufim is the taich, part of the description of Anoshim. Then at the end of the Farbrengen, the Rebbe came back to this Rashi to explain why does Rashi tell us the individual who questioned Rabbi Yossi. He says he'll explain it. He doesn't want to get involved too much into this inyan, as we will hear in a minute why. But briefly he will explain it. Rebbe says we find in ancient history books who Aroyes was. Aroyos was a galach. Uba Hakdama, with a little introduction, Abba says there's a difference between the Muslim Emunah and the Notzrische Emunah, the Christian Emunah. The Rambam explains it, that the Christian Emunah is Avodah Zarah. Pure outright Avodah Zarah. And as the Rebbe explained, Trinity is from the expression three in other words. Christian Emunah is based on believing in three, in Oiseish, and in other words, they believe in three. And this is an inyan of Avodah Zarah. However, the Muslim Emunah is not Avodah Zarah. He says what they go to Mecca and they bow there, to the worship there. It's not an inyan of Avodah Zarah. That's how the Rambam explains it also. We find regarding this Aroyos that he rebelled in his Emunah. And that is why they expelled him from being a Galach. Later they took him in again, and he was again expelled. In other words, he was arguing the concept of Christianity. He was against it. He was debating it. He was debating it, as I just said. Memela, what did he believe in? He believed in an inyan, not in an inyan of three, but he was debating for Achdus. When we're talking in Sfiras, Rabbi says, there's the way Sfiras are in Kedusha, and we have the way the same inyanim are in L'Ummah and the contrary to Kedusha. When this Aroyos was kind of like sticking up, if I should use this expression, for the concept of one when we're talking in Sfiras is Sfiras HaChochmah. Memele, that is his shaykhs to question these inyanim, and he questioned from Rabbi Yossi, whose Rabbi Yossi is Bine Dikdusha, and he was Chachma de L'Ummah, and that is why de L'Ummah. L'Ummah means the opposite. L'Ummah, the contrary of Kedusha. Because he also had a shaykhs to these inyanim, that is why he questioned these inyanim. Rabbi says, being that we began talking the Rashi and an inyan that has a shaykhs to Chachma and Bina, so Memela, the interpretation in Pirkei Avos will also be such on an inyan that has a shaykhs to Chachma and Bina. And today we are reciting the second Perik. This afternoon after Mincha we said Perik Beis. Perik Beis we find Chamisha Talmidim Hoyeloi Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai had 5 Talmidim. Ve'elohim, and these are they. Who was the first? Rabbi Eliezer ben Hukanas. Then the Mishnah goes on and tells us what was the specialty of Rabbi Eliezer ben Hukanas. His specialty was that he was a boyer sud sheina ma'abetipa. Like a ditch where not a drop gets lost, not a drop of water. Thank you. And the same, Rabbi Eliezer ben Hukanas, everything which he learned remained within him. That was the first one of the students of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. The last one of his disciples is Rabbi Elazar ben Aroch. What is Rabbi Elazar ben Aroch? Kemayon hamizgaber, like a well that constantly keeps on strengthening itself and strengthening itself. If we have to look at it from a view of Chochmah and Bina, the concept of Chochmah applies to Rabbi Elazar ben Hukanas' learning. He was a ber sud sheina ma'abetipa tipa. Whatever he learned remained within him. Bina is like we learned in Rashi, Mevin Dava Matayich Dava. In other words, one who keeps on going deeper and deeper into Chachmah. What is that? That's the union of Mayim HaMizgaba. So furthermore, that is why Rabbi Eliezer ben Hukanas has the Yud in his name. Rabbi Elazar ben Aroch does not have a Yud. A Yud is explained in Chassidus, stands for Sfiras HaChochmah. The Mishnah goes on with quotations from all of these Tanoim. What is the quotation of Rabbi Loza? This Rabbi Loza, who was Kemayan HaMizgabe, he was like a power, his power on learning was so great, his strength in learning was such, just like a well that constantly keeps on strengthening itself. What does he tell us? We look at Mishnah Yudalit. Rabbi Loza has a shakod little me'Torah. You constantly have to learn Torah. In other words, person who is in the Madriga of Rabbi Loza, he's a Mayan HaMizgabe. Mayan HaMizgabe, you could sit back and say, he's so successful in learning, he doesn't have to learn anymore. So here we find the lesson though. Dafke, this person who is so outstanding in learning, what does he say? What kind of a hero does he give us? Have a shokod lil me'Torah. We should note that we constantly have to keep on learning Torah. Otherwise, the Rebbe says, those who don't learn Torah, then there's a Gemara that people who haven't learned for a long time, so they were given to read a pasuk. They were given to read the pasuk HaChodesh Hazeh Lochem. So instead of reading HaChodesh Hazeh Lochem, they read HaCheresh Hoya Libam. Why? From not learning a long time. So no matter how great one may be, he never has to stop learning. The Rebbe says also, we find, it also corresponds to what the Mishnah says in Mishnah Yud of the Perek. When Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai told his disciples, they should all suggest what is a proper derech, what is the proper path for a person to choose. What does Rabbi Eliezer say? Ayin toiva, a good eye. This Rabbi Eliezer, whose inyan was Chochmah. Because Chassidus has explained that Chochmah has to do with the inyan of Riyah, with the inyan of vision. What does Rabbi Loza ben Aruch say? Rabbi Loza says, Leif toiv, a good heart. Inyan of Bina. Also, these are all deep in Yonim, it's explained in Chassidus at length. But how the inyan of Bina has to do with Rechoves Hanor, Harchava, broadness, which is reflected in the concept of Bina, this has to do with a good heart. And Rambam, we mentioned a very interesting thing today regarding Rambam. The Rebbe said the halachas, hilchas beis abchira, the Rebbe wants that we should learn during the 3 weeks, particularly during the 9 days, we should learn in Yonim that have a shaychus to the Beis HaMikdash. The Rebbe brought out a very interesting thing, that in Hilchos Beis HaBchira, which is the halachas, the exact description of the Beis HaMikdash in the Rambam, Hilchos Beis HaBchira has 8 prokim. Why did the Rambam make 8 prokim for Hilchos Beis HaBchira? This is very simple. Because we have 9 days. 9 days include Tisha B'Av. Tisha B'Av, we're not allowed to learn this. So we are left with 8 days in the month of Av that we should learn Hilchos Beis HaBchira. The Rebbe says we should learn at least a perik a day. So we have 8 prokim in Hilchos Beis HaBchira. This allows us that every day from Rosh Chodesh Av until Tisha B'Av, not including Tisha B'Av, because as of Erev Tisha B'Av in the afternoon we're already not allowed to learn. We can learn a perik in the Rambam. Based on this calculation, today's Rambam is the 4th perik of Beis HaBchira, because we are learning a perik a day. So the Rebbe raised the question. The Rambam begins, Even hoisa b'kodesh HaKadoshim. There was an Even, there was a big rock in the Kodesh HaKadoshim b'ma'arovai, on the east side, west, thank you. On the west side of the Kodesh HaKadoshim, Sha'alea hoya orin munach, that the orin was on this rock. Rabbi raised the question, where is the source of the Rambam that this was on the west side, the western side of the Kodesh HaKadoshim? Actually, the Oren, on one hand we are told that Mokum Oren Einem Min Amida, that the Oren did not take up any space at all. Then we are told in the Psukim how exactly the Oren was, how many Amis to this side, how many Amis to the other side, etc. So what is the source of the Rambam that it was B'ma'arovai? Rabbi also explained the Rambam in today's Shir of Rambam. No. where the Rambam talks about mitzvahs esel kadesh kohen ha'ovid yoda v'raglav. There was a mitzvah saseh in the Beis HaMikdash that a kohen ha'ovid, the kohen who did the avodah, was supposed to sanctify his hands and his feet, which means he had to pour water on his hands and on his feet. And then he was permitted to do the avodah. V'achakach yaveh. Rebbe says, there's a Rambam in Hilchis Tmura, which the Rebbe quotes very often, that all inyanim and mitzvahs have their spiritual interpretation. Memele, what is the Hayra and Avedas Hashem, the spiritual interpretation of this inyan here? First of all, the Rebbe says there's an inyan in halacha. If a kohen, halacha question, if the kohen had to wash his hands and feet only in the morning and this was sufficient for the entire day, or each time he was masiyach das, which means he distracted his mind and got involved in other things, and later in the day he went back to do the avodah, if he had to wash his hands and feet again, or he didn't. This the Rebbe says he discussed at a previous occasion, he had discussed it in the previous Farbrengen. Rebbe asked a different question. B'negei Shabbos, in Hilchas Shabbos we find that we have to wash up before Shabbos. What is the halacha? What do we have to wash up before Shabbos? We have to wash our hands, our face and feet. Panav yoda v'raglav. So if there's an inyan in washing our face, when Erev Shabbos, before we go into the Shabbos, why isn't there the same minyan in the Beis HaMikdash? Here the Rebbe went into a lengthy explanation and he used the expression that when a kohen does the avodah, there's the inyan of avodas pnim, corresponding the idea of pnim inside to the concept of panim, of face. In other words, a kohen, where the Rebbe is explaining, if I understood correctly, when a kohen goes in to do the avodah, the Beis HaMikdash, he already has to be on a certain spiritual level. The Rebbe brought an example. We shecht karbanos in the Beis HaMikdash. However, if we were to take chulin, which means a behemoth which is not kodesh, and take this behemoth's chulin and bring it into the Beis HaMikdash and shecht it there, we're oivan an isach. To shecht chulin ba'azara is an isach. What's wrong? You're taking a behemoth, which is a chulin, which is a vachadik behemoth, which means it has no kedusha, and you're uplifting it. You're spiritually uplifting it because you're bringing it into the mikdash and you're going to shecht it in the mikdash. You said no. This is not the inyan of mikdash. A korban you're allowed to shech there, and a chul we're not allowed to shech. Which shows that before an avodah is done in the Beis HaMikdash, on there's already a certain level of kedusha that has to prevail, so that we can do the avodah in the Beis HaMikdash. That is why chul we can't shech in the azara. As something which already has a kedusha, we were makdish a behemoth, we made it for a korban. We take this behemoth into the Beis HaMikdash, you're allowed to shech. A kohen who is a bal mum, a kohen who is not complete, a kohen who is lacking something in his body, is not allowed to do the avodah. He has to be a tomim, he has to be complete. So the Rebbe is teaching the completeness of his gashmiyas is a reflection of his completeness in ruchnius. There's a pasuk which is quoted often in Chassidus. Aniyu shloime b'ni chatoyim. Chassidus teaches that the concept of a chet, the concept of sin, mustn't necessarily be a sin, an aveira, in far as a deed of an aveira, an act of an aveira. Chassidus teaches chaserim. If we lack something, it's also an inyan of an aveira. It's a deeper look at chet, naturally. This is how Chassidus looks at chet. In other words, when one is choser something, when one is lacking something, in other words, he's not up to the proper spiritual level, which he should be, this is also an inyan of chet. It's also an inyan, avada, you can't touch it as a simple aveira, but in a deeper look, in a more pneumistic view, this is the inyan of a chet. Memela, when we say that one who is a balmum, he's not complete, he's a choser. He's a choser, that means he has an inyan of chet. So that is why the Rebbe says, the Rambam who brings the halacha, does not tell us a halacha that there's a mitzvah on a kohen to be mekadosh panav also. Because kind of like panav has to have the kedusha already. In other words, he has to be at a certain level of kedusha to go in to do the avodah in the Beis Hamikdash. The only thing is we are told, mitzvah sasei, there's a mitzvah lekadosh kohen oivet, yodav v'raglav. The Rebbe concluded the Farbrengen again with the request that this Indian which was spoken about earlier regarding to Asay L'cha Rav, that everybody should choose a Rav, should choose somebody to look up to and get guidance from, should reach to everybody, and it's extremely important, and he asks that everybody relate it to another person and to another person and so forth. And he concluded the Farbrengen, the Rebbe always has a custom at the end of the Farbrengen, he reminds that everybody who has to make a bracha achreina should make a bracha achreina. The Rebbe says whoever has to make a bracha achreina should make a bracha achreina, and together with this we should all make a bracha achreina on the galus. No more galus. When do we make a bracha achreina? When we finish something, that's when we make a bracha achreina. So it should be the end of the galus, and Mashiach should come and take us out of galus.